Imagine spending years behind bars for a crime you didn't commit. Imagine confessing to that crime, despite being innocent. This is the nightmare scenario faced by countless individuals who have been coerced into giving false confessions. Join us as we dive deep into some of the most shocking unsolved cases where innocent people were forced to admit to crimes they never committed, and explore the devastating consequences of this all too common occurrence in our justice system. Our first case, which we're going to discuss, is of Chuck Erickson and Ryan Ferguson in the early morning hours of Halloween 2001. A journalist was murdered outside of his office building in Columbia, Missouri. Years later, two young companions who had been spotted that evening frolicking about the town were detained and accused of the murder. The case, which had youngsters targeting a middle-aged man for a heist that went awry, was seen by prosecutors as being the quintessential open and shut case. Ryan Ferguson, one of the juvenile defendants, knew that he and his companion were not accountable for the murder. There was obviously a problem. In March 2004, Ferguson and his buddy Chuck Erickson were detained for the murder of Kent Heathalt, the sports editor of the Columbia Daily Tribune. On November 1st at about 2 a.m., the murder occurred as Heathalt was leaving for work. Heathalt was discovered dead in the parking lot, strangled. He was 48. When Erickson confessed to the murder and linked Ferguson to it, the case was unsolved for 2 years. At the night Heathalt was killed, Erickson and Ferguson, both 17 years old, were in Columbia attending Halloween parties and then sneaking into a campus bar. Erickson, who acknowledged using drugs and alcohol that evening, was unable to recall anything that occurred. Erickson started experiencing visions that led him to assume he was the murderer after learning about the murder in the news in October 2003. The next month, Erickson recognized himself in a police drawing of a potential suspect. After he informed his pals about everything, the Columbia police were notified. Erickson was apprehended and questioned. However, it's evident from viewing the footage of the questioning that Erickson had no knowledge of the crime.
I'm going to be point blank with you, pal. Right now, your hind end is the one that's hanging over the edge, and Ryan could care less about it. Okay? Do you understand me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, you better start thinking very clearly.
Okay.
Because it's you that is on this chopping block.
Okay.
Am I clear to you?
Yes.
Erickson offered educated suggestions when asked to name the murder weapon used to kill Heathalt. No seasoned detective would do what the detective questioning Erickson did. He really revealed to him the specifics of the crime. He revealed to Erickson that he had used his own belt to strangle Heathalt. Only the buckle was ever found. However, a ton of forensic evidence such as hair, blood, fingerprints, and footprints was found. The issue is that no DNA matched either Erickson or Ferguson. The testimony of Erickson and a janitor who claimed to have seen both young men in the parking lot the night of the murder was the only thing that connected Ferguson to the crime. On December 5th, 2005, it was enough to find Ferguson guilty. Ferguson, who was 21 at the time, received a 40-year prison term. Erickson was given a 25-year term as part of a plea agreement. Erickson said he had made everything up and was under pressure from Boone County prosecutor Kevin Crane 4 years after the trial. Jerry Trump, the janitor, likewise renounced his evidence, alleging that the prosecution had manipulated him. A few weeks after his 29th birthday, on November 12, 2013, Ferguson was granted his release from jail. The district attorney's office in Boone County said that it will no longer pursue a prosecution against Ferguson. Additionally, the Attorney General of Missouri decided not to refile charges. Ryan Ferguson was imprisoned for a crime he did not commit for 9 years, 8 months, and 2 days. Next, we're going to talk about the West Memphis Three. The West Memphis Three are Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr., who were found guilty of 3 murders in West Memphis in 1994 while still minors. Chris Byers, Stevie Branch, and Michael Moore were all 8-year-old boys who were allegedly killed by Eccles, Baldwin, and Miskelly. The 3 men's trials, which included claims that the murders were part of a cultic ritual and subsequent conviction, caused outrage across the country and the globe, sparked the creation of books and movies, and sparked a push to have the 3 men retried or released, since it was widely considered that they had been unfairly convicted. Less than 24 hours after their parents reported them missing on May 6, 1993, Byers, Branch, and Moore were discovered in a wet ditch in the Robin Hood Hills area. The youngsters were assaulted, hogtied, and stripped nude. Even though the incident was violent, there wasn't much evidence at the scene. Police noticed that there was an odd absence of blood or fibers and that the area seemed to have been well cleaned. The police had to deal with a situation that rapidly attracted national attention but didn't provide them with much information to identify the offender or offender. The boy's corpse's deterioration rapidly sparked speculation that a demonic group was to blame. The location of the murder scene in the woods, the boy's nakedness, the placement of their corpses, and particularly the castration raised questions about Satanism among the villagers and the authorities. Gary Glitchell, the chief inspector, notified the public a few days after the killings that the police were looking into a variety of theories, including cult activities. More conventional ideas such as the hypothesis that someone who knew the boys committed the killings were eclipsed throughout the course of the inquiry by the cult notion. Jerry Driver, a juvenile probation officer for the Crittenden County, thought the neighborhood was home to a demonic cult. His interactions with Damien Eccles, a juvenile who had been put under his supervision until he turned 18 after being arrested for burglary and sexual misbehavior, were largely responsible for this view. Driver was more and more certain that Eccles belonged to a demonic group as he talked with him. Eccles acknowledged his belief in magic, but he denied any association with Satanism. Driver informed the West Memphis police of his concerns. Both Jason Baldwin and Eccles were social outsiders, yet they were buddies. Baldwin fared well in school and refrained from participating in Eccles' magical research. They interacted often despite having numerous disparities. Jesse Miskelly Jr., the third and last suspect, had nothing in common with Baldwin or Eccles. Vicky Hutchison, a lady who offered to assist the police investigation, was the parent of the child he babysat for. Hutchison started questioning Miss Kelly about the case, and he consented to bring her to Eccles, who was already a recognized suspect at the time. Hutchison said to the police that Miss Kelly traveled with them to a meeting of witches after she convinced Eccles to bring her along. Miss Kelly was thereafter escorted to the police station and interrogated there for many hours, of which just over 30 minutes were documented. Miss Kelly confessed after being interrogated and blamed Baldwin, Eccles, and himself. However, Miss Kelly's confession did not line up with information about the crime that the police had already had. Miss Kelly sometimes contradicted himself while admitting. On June 3, 1993, the police detained Miss Kelly, Eccles, and Baldwin notwithstanding any apparent issues with his confession. Miss Kelly backtracked almost soon after admitting. He said that he had been perplexed by the police's actions and had made an effort to comply without appreciating the consequences of his words. The prosecution and defense team started making preparations for the trial while the three lads were still being held in jail. Blood was discovered on a knife that had previously belonged to the John Mark Byers, Chris Byers' stepfather, during the process of collecting evidence. Soon after the killings, Byers had given the knife away. It was discovered that the blood was consistent with both Chris and Mark Byers' blood. The cops chose not to follow up on this possible lead, however. Additionally, the cops gave up on a possible lead that was reported by a nearby Bojangles restaurant. The night the boys vanished, a staff member saw a confused guy approach the eatery covered in dirt and blood. The guy entered the bathroom and left traces of blood on the walls. The police abandoned this lead and ultimately lost the evidence. Now we're on to our final case, Earl Washington Jr.
Did you kill that woman?
No, sir.
But you told the police that you did.
Yes, sir.
Why did you tell the police that you did it?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, sir.
Rebecca Lynn Williams, a 19-year-old mother of three who lived in Culpeper, Virginia, was raped and stabbed more than 30 times in June 1982. Before she died, all she could say about her assailant was that he was a black guy operating alone. Washington was detained in neighboring Fauquier County for an alleged burglary and malicious injury. About a year after the offense was committed, police said that after 2 days of interrogation, he had admitted to a total of 5 crimes, including Rebecca Lynn Williams' murder. The first 4 of the 5 confessions were rejected by the Commonwealth due to the inconsistent nature of the evidence and the victim's inability to identify Washington. Washington, however, admitted that he had raped and murdered Rebecca Lynn Williams in the 6th confession. After being questioned, it emerged that Washington was unaware of his victim's ethnicity, the location of the apartment where she was slain, or the fact that he had raped her. Washington also claimed that Miss Williams was short when in reality she was 5'8", and that he only stabbed her 2 or 3 times. Even though the victim had 38 stab wounds, and that no one else was in the apartment on the day of the crime despite the fact that Miss Williams' 2 young children were present. Authorities only accepted Washington's testimony and had it documented in writing with his signature after his 4th failed rehearsal of a confession. After being escorted to the murder site 3 times in one day by the police, who ultimately had to assist him in choosing Williams' apartment, he was able to identify it. Psychiatric evaluations on Washington revealed that, to make up for his handicap, he would respectfully submit to every authority figure he encountered. Washington cooperated and provided positive comments to win their favor when police officers asked him leading questions to elicit a confession. Only the state psychologist gave testimony at trial, arguing that Washington was competent when he made his statement. An unusual plasma protein was discovered when a forensic scientist used serology testing on evidence from the murder scene. Without doing any more testing, a modified forensic report was issued after Washington, who doesn't contain the unusual protein, was named as a suspect. This report said that testing for the rare protein was inconclusive. On January 20th, 1984, the jury returned with a judgment of death. In May 1984, Washington pleaded guilty to a separate burglary and intentional wounding case and was given 2 sentences of 15 years each. Another death row convict, Joseph Giarantano, informed a lawyer working on another case at the Virginia jail, Anne-Marie Deans, a non-lawyer who had been voluntarily helping death row inmates for years, about Washington's narrative in August 1985, just before his scheduled execution in September. 9 days before his planned execution, the lawyer took Washington's case to her legal firm, which successfully obtained a stay of execution for the defendant. The findings of the DNA test in October 1993 show that Washington was not a donor to the seminal stain. Washington was not cleared because Virginia law included a time limit, which gave a defendant just 21 days to present fresh evidence. Washington's sentence was instead changed by the then Governor Wilder to life in prison. Washington remained in prison for 6 more years before his counsel persuaded the newly elected Governor Glymore to seek additional DNA testing. Governor Glymore pardoned Washington for the capital murder conviction in October 2000, but only on the narrow argument that a jury would not have found him guilty based on the facts at the time. In February 2001, he was allowed to leave jail under parole monitoring. Soon after being released from prison, Washington said, "This was a whole lot better than I thought." About life outside of jail, Washington was given an absolute pardon in 2007, 6 years after leaving prison, by then Gov. Kane, who acknowledged that Washington had been wrongfully convicted of murder and rape. Thank you for watching this video.